Hello, class, and welcome to our video review of pages 18 to 29 in Writing Logically, Thinking Critically. We left off with the idea of metaphors, right? Using metaphors in everyday language in the essay Poetry for Everyday Life, in which we all recognize how and when we use metaphors. And hopefully, you're noticing that Shakespeare uses metaphors often to help explain things. Now, the metaphor gets it started, right? It's a simple comparison that's implied. A simile is when you add the words like or as. So, writing is like therapy, or the metaphor would be writing is therapeutic. Now, on page 18, we're introduced to the idea of analogy. An analogy is when you explain the metaphor or the simile. So, an analogy always starts with a metaphor or simile, and then when you explain it, that's the analogy. You give the details. As the book says, when we reason by analogy, we compare two or more things, noting the characteristics they share and suggesting that since they don't share these characteristics, since they share these characteristics, they probably share other characteristics. So keep in mind, an analogy starts with a metaphor or a simile, and you're comparing two things. One thing that your reader knows something about to something that they might not know about so they can better understand it. First example of an analogy, right? We have on page 19, what will it take? And I think that not only do we see the parallelism where each of the sentences start at some point in American history, at some point in American history, at some point in our history, and they look at how with slavery, right, women's suffrage, uh, voting rights for black people, right, and the way that Native Americans were treated, they compare those four things, right, to the idea of that, right? So, what will it take for Americans to start, right? Again, they look at amendments of the Constitution that we realized were wrong and we changed, and they're suggesting that we should also realize a certain amendment to the Constitution is wrong and we should change it, which is gun gun rights. And again, there's a lot of debate on that, but their point is that just because people say, "Oh, it's in the Constitution," they look at four things in the Constitution that we realized in hindsight are wrong and changed, and say that because of these school shootings, we should also recognize that our gun laws need to change that amendment. Again, you don't have to agree or disagree, but it's a very specific analogy that makes facts. And I know gun ownership is a big deal, and a lot of people feel as though the right to own a gun should not change. And I'm not saying it should or it shouldn't, but I'm saying you recognize the analogy here when people say, oh, well, it's a constitutional right. They point out that there were constitutional amendments that were illogical, so we changed them. Maybe this is just another one. Again, I'm not here to argue for or against guns right now. I'm just here to explain the analogy on page 19. Now, the next one's a little bit easier, right? Oof, let me have some coffee. Cinnamon dolce Starbucks coffee. It's very tasty. I recommend it if you get a chance, if you're a coffee drinker. Safety could pay for weapons makers. Now, here's an easier analogy to break down. Just as Volvo, right, made a lot of money off of inventing seatbelts and other safety measures for cars when people didn't think they needed safety measures. What they're saying is in a similar manner, if gun companies decided to create safety measures for guns, it would be possibly financially beneficial for them as well, right? So I think the comparison is clear with the details. On page 21, right, we have our key terms from chapter 1. So again, when you're reading the chapters in Writing Logically, Thinking Critically, I'll always ask you to define and explain the key terms. Um, the book does a nice job of defining them and explaining them, and then they kind of review those definitions and explanations at the end of each chapter. So I hope you're finding it effective. Our next term, and as we turn to 22 and 23, right? We have try rolling on the ground, roll on the ground, the cartoon, right? Obviously, it's winter, it's a roof, they're elves, the chimney's on fire. We assume the person they're speaking to is Santa, but we don't know for sure. They don't say roll on the ground, Santa, roll on the ground, Santa. So an inference is a conclusion about the unknown based on what you know. It's essentially an educated guess, but you have to have facts to back it up. If you don't have any facts, if you don't have any logos, it's just an opinion, right? If you have facts to back it up, a conclusion about the unknown based on the known, it is therefore called an inference. So we have um, the Sherlock, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, The Adventure of the Speckled Band, right? The Sherlock Holmes excerpt. Again, that's what detectives do. They make inferences, right? They gather all the facts to try to piece it together and figure out what happened. Now, how reliable is an inference on page 24 if you're kind of flipping and reading along with me? Well, it depends on how many facts you have. The more facts that you have to support your inferences, the more reliable they are. A fact is something obviously that can be verified. Now, fact checkers, I mean, with fake news, with Twitter, and all of these various social media platforms having fact checkers, I think everybody can understand what they're talking about on page 26 and relate it to our modern cultural context, specifically these days with the internet. Um, Fake news is a big deal, and it's something that's not based on facts. So you have to have facts. Now, when you make an inference, a conclusion about the unknown based on the known, right? And you express positive or negative approval or disapproval, now it becomes a judgment. So an inference is a conclusion about the unknown based on the known, an educated guess. A judgment is an educated guess, an inference that expresses approval or disapproval. Think about the words that you use. Um, when I was teaching on ground in the classroom, I always use the example. If you come to class and you make an educated guess that there's probably going to be a quiz because I told you I'm going to quiz you on the boldface words in the book, and I quizzed you on the boldface words in the book the class before, you won't actually know until you come to class. So it is an inference. It's not a fact, but it's based on the fact that you had a class and a quiz the last class, and that I told you I'm going to quiz you. So if you say, I infer there's going to be a quiz today, that's exactly what it is, an inference. But notice how it's free of positive or negative. If you say, I infer there's going to be another one of those pointless, stupid, fun, effective, easy quizzes today, now you're making a judgment. Okay? So essentially, they bring up the Second Amendment to the United States again on page 27. Gun control seems to be a common theme in this chapter. And they look at the fact that those who agree with it say, right, it's a good amendment, but those that disagree with it say, well, look at a well regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. When the Second Amendment to the Constitution was drafted, the whole point was for protection, right? They didn't have police, they didn't have sheriffs. If somebody came to your farm and wanted to steal your food and rob you, you had a gun to protect yourself. And when the American colonists had to go to war against the British, right? The British are coming, the British are coming. Who fought them? Everyday people. They'd grab their gun and they'd leave, and the wife and kids would stay home at the farm. So people needed a gun to protect themselves and to go fight in the war. Nowadays, we have the Army, we have the Marines, we have police, we have sheriffs. So do we still need to have guns for the same reason? Again, I'm not arguing pro or against. I respect everyone's beliefs. And to be honest, I don't even really know where I stand on it. There's so much, I mean, with the school shootings, but then I get it. You don't want to allow the government to, declare martial law and take over. Personally, I don't really know where I stand on the gun thing. So I can see both sides of it. And that's the key, is that you want to remain open and have an open worldview. You don't have to agree with both sides of something. But here on page 27, right, this discussion on the Second Amendment, um, I'm not really sure which side I agree with more than the other, but I see both perspectives. Okay, so that's the important thing because they both give facts to support. So let's turn the page. Now we get to exercise 2C, distinguishing between facts, inferences, and judgments. Okay, now things are getting interesting. So if you would follow along with me, I know you all posted your answers in the discussion. Good job. Keep up the good work. I really enjoy reading everybody's discussion posts, and I think everything's going along well. And I read them before I do these videos, so I think everybody's pretty good with number one. It's a fact. It can be verified. Two, material on the internet should not be censored. The should not makes it a judgment because it's disapproval. One is a fact. Two is a judgment. Three, okay, this one's a lot. There's facts and judgments. The fact is that it's for sale. The fact is that it's 3 bedrooms, and it's a fact that it's listed at 475. Those can all be verified. It's a judgment that it's lovely. It's a judgment that it's forest. It's a judgment that it's easy, and it's a judgment that it's a bargain. Notice how adjectives, what kind of house? Lovely. What kind of forest? I'm sorry, what kind of setting? Forest. What kind of commute? Easy. They usually express the approval or disapproval. So 3 has facts and judgments. 4, 41% of Californians who die are cremated. That's a fact. 5, artist Winslow didn't begin to paint seriously until 1862. Seriously makes it a judgment. 6, Eric has a drinking problem. Problem makes it a judgment. 7, critic Ben Brantley called the latest production of Shakespeare's As You Like It exhilarating. The fact that he called it exhilarating and they used quotes is a fact. I even said that in the sentence. Whenever something's in quotes, it's a fact because that means the person actually said it. Now, the word choice, exhilarating, is a judgment. So exhilarating in quotes is a fact, and the word that he used, exhilarating itself, is a judgment because it suggests approval. Last but not least, number 8, after I took those vitamin pills recommended by the coach, I scored a touchdown. All right, that's a fact. You took the pills, you scored a touchdown. Those pills sure did the trick. That's a judgment, right? They're expressing positive approval of the pills, right? Scored a pill, took the pills, scored a touchdown. The approval, those pills sure did the trick, is a judgment. So make sure you recognize the difference between facts and inferences and judgments. Now remember, an inference that expresses approval or disapproval is a judgment. So all judgments are inferences, but not all inferences are judgments. The traffic facts at the top of 29 are real interesting. The first one, children at play signs don't reduce accidents. People don't pay attention to them and they don't care, maybe? Drivers honk less on weekends. Okay, they honk more when they're in a rush. Men honk more than women. Interesting. And both men and women honk more at women than at men. Stereotypes, perhaps? Sexism, perhaps? Objectification, perhaps? 3, new cars crash more frequently than older ones. Interesting. Normally, you'd think new car drivers would be more careful, but if you have a new car, chances are you have full insurance coverage. So, you know, if you get in an accident, everything's going to be okay. So maybe you drive a little bit more recklessly, where if you have an old car, you might just have liability and you might not have full coverage. So you'll drive more carefully. Then again, maybe there's more new cars on the road. I don't know. There's a lot going on there. Half of all fatalities occur at a speed of less than 35 miles an hour. Right? People think you can't die going slowly, but unfortunately, that is the case. Maybe people drive more carelessly at less than 35. 1 in 5 urban crashes occur when a driver is searching for parking. People aren't paying attention when they park. 6 Saturdays at 1 has heavier traffic days than weekday rush hours. That's interesting. Sounds like everybody's out running errands. And again, you could kind of go through these and you can kind of understand the inferences that we can draw from these facts and at times they're quite startling. So I thought everybody did a nice job responding on the discussion for this one as well. All right. Whew, we're on page 29, right around the time that I like to end the video and kind of say thank you for your patience. Stay tuned. Reading and writing about literature, day 3 review is up next.